was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a chance to reconnect. That's what I'd sold it as. Anyway, to be honest, I was just desperate. My relationship with Chloe was on the kind of shaky ground that makes your stomach drop out every time your phone lights up with her name. 6 years, and it felt like we were speaking different languages. So, when I saw a last-minute deal for a weekend at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, I booked it. I'd seen the pictures, the grand, white building nestled against the Rocky Mountains, all old-world charm and epic scenery. It seemed like the kind of place that could fix things. I'd heard the rumors, of course, about it being haunted, the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining. I thought it would be a fun story to tell, a little shared adventure. I was an idiot. The drive up from Denver was tense. Chloe was quiet, staring out the passenger window at the winding mountain road, the aspens just starting to turn a fiery gold. I kept stealing glances at her. Even pissed off, she was breathtaking. She had this way of chewing on her lower lip when she was thinking, her full, glossed lips pressing together. She was wearing a simple gray V-neck t-shirt, and the way it stretched across her chest, the soft curve of her breasts outlined against the fabric, made it hard to keep my eyes on the road. I wanted to reach over, put my hand on her thigh, feel the warmth of her skin through her jeans, but the space between us felt like a chasm. "It's supposed to be beautiful," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet car. Was all she offered, not turning her head. We pulled up to the hotel, and it was every bit as imposing as the photos promised, stark white, with a red roof, sitting on a hill like a grand, watchful sentinel. The mountains behind it were immense, putting everything in perspective, and not in a good way. It felt isolating. We checked in at the front desk, a polished affair of dark wood. The clerk, a young guy named Marcus with an overly cheerful demeanor, handed us our key cards. "You're in room 217, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's one of our historic rooms." Chloe finally showed a flicker of interest. "Is that, the room?" Marcus's smile tightened. "All our rooms have history, enjoy your stay." The hallway on the second floor was long, dimly lit, and dead silent. Our footsteps were swallowed by a thick red carpet patterned with dizzying geometric designs. The air was still and cool. I slid the key card into the lock of 217, the green light flickered, and the door clicked open. The room was nice. Surprisingly normal. A large, comfortable-looking bed with a heavy wooden headboard dominated the space. There was a writing desk, an armchair, and a bathroom off to the side. A big window looked out over the hotel grounds and the mountains beyond. It was charming in an old-fashioned way. Chloe dropped her bag by the bed and walked to the window, her hips swaying gently in her tight-fitting jeans. I watched the way the denim hugged the curve of her ass, a familiar ache of want mixing with my anxiety. This was my chance. I had to make this work. "It's nice," she conceded, turning around. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, the wall was down. I saw the woman I'd fallen for. Then she looked away and it was back. "I'm gonna freshen up." She disappeared into the bathroom and I heard the lock click. The sound was like a pinprick. I sat on the edge of the bed, the old springs groaning under my weight. I looked around the room. It was then I noticed the smell. Not a bad smell. Faint, almost imperceptible. A floral scent, like old perfume. Lavender, maybe. I figured it was just the hotel's cleaning products, something they used in all the rooms. We decided to take a walk around the grounds before dinner. The air outside was crisp and thin. We wandered through the labyrinthine hallways of the hotel, peeking into empty ballrooms with grand pianos, past cases displaying old photographs of the Stanley family. The place was a tomb of echoes. You could feel the weight of all the people who had passed through, their laughter and conversations soaked into the walls. We ended up in the music room, a vast space with a magnificent view of the mountains. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, but the room was empty. That's when I first saw him. He was sitting alone in a high-backed armchair in the far corner, partially obscured by shadow. An older man, maybe in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and a gaunt, pale face. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit, the kind you don't see much anymore. He wasn't reading a book or looking at his phone. He was just sitting, perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, staring into the middle distance. But as we walked in, his head turned, slowly, deliberately, and his eyes locked onto us. They were a pale, watery blue, and they held an intensity that was immediately unsettling. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an appraisal. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I put my arm around Chloe's waist, pulling her a little closer, a gesture that was part affection, part territorial instinct. She leaned into me, and I could feel the warmth of her body through her shirt. I glanced down, catching a glimpse of the smooth skin of her lower back where her shirt had ridden up. The contrast between the mundane intimacy of that small patch of skin and the man's unnerving stare was jarring. "Let's keep going," I murmured into her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo. As we left the room, I glanced back. The man was still watching us, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to a faint, distant sound. Dinner in the grand dining room was a slightly more successful affair. The food was good, the wine was better, and Chloe seemed to be thawing. She laughed at one of my stupid jokes, a real, genuine laugh that lit up her face and made her eyes crinkle at the corners. I found myself staring at her mouth, at the way her lips curled around the rim of her wine glass. I imagined tracing the line of her jaw with my finger, then my lips. The desire was a sharp, physical pull, a welcome distraction from the low-grade unease that had been humming in my veins since the music room. "This is nice," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her fingers were cool. "I'm sorry I've been distant." "It's okay," I said, turning my hand over to intertwine my fingers with hers. "We're here now." It was when we were leaving the dining room that I saw the man again. He was standing near the grand staircase, one hand resting on the polished wood of the banister. He wasn't looking at us this time. He was looking up the stairs, towards the second floor. But as we passed, his head swiveled, those pale eyes tracking our movement. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not a friendly greeting, but an acknowledgement, like a scientist noting the behavior of a specimen. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Back in room 217, the mood had shifted again. The wine had worn off, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Chloe changed into a thin, silky camisole and a pair of shorts to sleep in. The sight of her, the casual intimacy of it, was a torment. The delicate straps of the camisole highlighted the graceful slope of her shoulders. I could see the outline of her body beneath the fabric, the gentle swell of her breasts, the flat plane of her stomach. I wanted to cross the room, pull her into my arms, bury my face in her neck, but the air felt charged with something else, something that killed the mood. The perfume smell was stronger now, unmistakably lavender. "Do you smell that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Chloe sniffed the air. "Yeah, it's nice, like potpourri or something." She climbed into bed, turning her back to me. I got in on my side, leaving a careful foot of space between us. The room was dark, the only light a pale sliver of moon through the window. I lay there, listening to the sound of her breathing, waiting for it to even out into sleep. My mind kept circling back to the man in the suit. Who was he? A guest? He didn't act like one. There was a formality to him, a stillness that felt out of place. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. And I heard it. Faint, so faint it was almost part of the silence. A child's voice, humming. A simple, meandering melody, a lullaby I didn't recognize. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the walls, from the air itself. And the smell of lavender was now overpowering, a thick, cloying wave that filled my lungs. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I lay frozen, barely breathing. I turned my head slowly on the pillow, looking at Chloe. She was still asleep, her back to me, her breathing deep and regular. How could she not hear it? The humming stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed was profound, a heavy blanket smothering the room. The lavender scent began to recede, fading back to a faint trace. I didn't sleep again that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the window. The next morning I felt ragged. Chloe, however, seemed refreshed. "I slept like a rock," she said, stretching her arms over her head. The movement pulled her camisole taut across her chest, and for a moment, all my fear was eclipsed by a raw, hungry look at her body. The memory of the night felt like a bad dream, distant and unreal in the clean morning light. Me. Too. Elite. We went down for breakfast. I was on edge, scanning the dining room, half expecting to see the gaunt man in the suit. He wasn't there. Maybe it had all been in my head. The lack of sleep, the stress with Chloe, the suggestive power of the hotel's reputation that I was starting to feel foolish that we spent the day hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park, surrounded by breathtaking scenery that felt like an antidote to the hotel's cloistered atmosphere. For a few hours things felt almost normal, that we held hands, that we talked out on the trail. Walking behind her, I couldn't help but watch the powerful flex of her calf muscles, the sway of her hips in her hiking pants. The primal, simple attraction was a relief that it was real, that it was human. But back at the hotel that evening, the dread returned as we stepped through the front doors. The grand lobby felt less charming and more watchful, that we decided to take the historic night tour, thinking it would be a fun, kitschy way to lean into the hotel's spooky reputation. Maybe it would demystify everything, turn my fear into a joke. Our tour guide was a woman named Jasmine, probably in her 20s, with a theatrical flair. She led a group of about 15 of us through the darkened hallways, telling stories of ghostly apparitions and unexplained sounds. She confirmed what I already knew. Room 217 is one of our most active, she said, a dramatic whisper as we stood outside our own door. Guests often report waking at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the smell of perfume and the sound of a child humming. A woman next to me giggled nervously that I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, that it wasn't my imagination. Chloe squeezed my arm, her eyes wide. "That's our room," she whispered, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her voice. The tour ended in the basement, in a former tunnel that was now used for storage. That it was cold and damp, the air smelling of earth and old stone. Jasmine was telling a story about a phantom party that could sometimes be heard down there. When I saw him again, the man in the suit, that he was standing at the far end of the tunnel, just outside the circle of light from our group's lanterns, that he wasn't part of the tour, that he was just standing there watching us. His pale face was a smudge in the darkness. This time he was looking directly at me. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze was a physical pressure. I nudged Chloe. "Do you see that guy? The one in the suit from yesterday?" She squinted into the darkness. "Where? I don't see anyone." I looked back. The tunnel was empty, that he was gone. The rest of the tour was a blur. My heart wouldn't slow down. Back in our room, the dynamic had shifted again. The shared experience of the tour, the confirmation of the room's reputation, had broken through the ice between us. Chloe was animated, her fear having morphed into a kind of thrilling arousal. "That was so creepy," she said, kicking off her shoes. She sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her bare feet. Her toes were painted a dark red. That I watched the muscles in her calves work as she flexed her feet. The sight, combined with the adrenaline still coursing through me, created a confusing cocktail of fear and lust. "Did you really see someone in the tunnel?" she asked, looking up at me. Her eyes were bright. "I thought I did," I said, sitting next to her. The bed dipped, bringing our bodies closer. That I could smell her perfume, a modern, citrusy scent that fought with the lingering ghost of lavender in the room. "The same man I saw yesterday." "Maybe he's a ghost," she said, a playful smile on her lips. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe we'll see him tonight." Her breath was warm on my neck. The invitation was clear. The horror of the situation, the pervasive unease, had somehow become an aphrodisiac. That I reached out and touched her face, my thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Her skin was soft. She closed her eyes and leaned into my touch. For the first time in months, the connection felt real, electric. That we fell into each other, the kiss hungry and desperate, a collision of fear and desire. That it was frantic, clumsy, clothes were pulled off and discarded on the floor. That in the dim light, her body was a pale, beautiful landscape I knew by heart, but tonight it felt new, charged with the strange energy of the room. My hands roamed over her, gripping her hips, feeling the solid reality of her beneath me, a desperate anchor in a sea of creeping dread. That it was intense, almost violent in its passion, a way of screaming, "We are here, we are alive," into the silent, watching dark. Afterward, we lay tangled together, sweating and breathless. The room was quiet. The digital clock read 1:24 a.m. For a little while I felt calm, sated. The strange events of the past 2 days felt far away. This is what I came for, I thought. This is what we needed. That I fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The jolt was even more violent this time. My eyes snapped open. 3:17 a.m. The humming was louder that it wasn't a faint whisper in the air. It was clear, a little girl's voice, sweet and tuneful, humming that same forgotten lullaby that it sounded like it was right next to the bed. The lavender scent was so thick I could taste it at the back of my throat, sweet and suffocating, and Chloe was awake. I could feel her body rigid beside me. She was staring wide-eyed into the darkness towards the bathroom door. Her hand found mine under the sheets, her grip vice-tight, her nails digging into my palm. "Do you hear it?" she breathed, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, a new sound cut through the humming, that a soft, shuffling footstep on the carpet. Then another. Someone was in the room with us. The humming stopped. The footsteps stopped. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. That I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. The sliver of moonlight from the window illuminated a patch of floor near the armchair. And there he was. The man in the suit. That he was standing perfectly still, facing our bed. His gaunt face was pale in the dim light, his expression serene, almost blank. That he was just watching. His hands were clasped in front of him. That a sound escaped Chloe's throat, a choked whimper of pure terror. I wanted to move, to shout, to do something, but I was paralyzed, pinned to the bed by a fear so absolute it felt like a physical weight. This wasn't a ghost story anymore. This was an intrusion. A violation. This man, this thing, was in our room, watching us in our most vulnerable state. That he took a step forward. Then another. That he moved with an unnatural grace, utterly silent on the creaky floorboards. That he stopped at the foot of the bed. That he was so close I could see the fine weave of his suit jacket, the dull glint of a cufflink. He didn't look at me. His pale, watery eyes were fixed on Chloe. That he slowly, deliberately, raised one hand and reached out towards her leg, which was exposed where the sheets had been kicked down. His fingers were long and thin, unnaturally pale. They hovered just inches above her skin, not touching, but tracing the shape of her calf in the air. A gesture of possession, of curation. Chloe was shaking uncontrollably, her breath coming in ragged hitches. That I felt a surge of something beyond fear, a primal, protective rage. That I tried to force my body to move, to lunge at him, but I was rooted to the spot, a spectator in my own nightmare. The man's lips parted. That he spoke.